Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law Section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to our Curious Amalgam. I'm Alicia Downey, and the title of today's episode is How Should Competition Law Be Dealing with AI and Climate Change? At our Curious Amalgam, we've always been interested in the intersection between competition and consumer protection law and the biggest societal issues of our times, including the survival of democracy, gender and racial equality, the rise of artificial intelligence, and climate change, to name just a few. In the past couple of years, today's guest has been urging the lawyers, regulators, and economists who make up the Antitrust Law Section to spend time looking at the role that competition and consumer protection laws have, or potentially will have, in dealing with the last two issues I mentioned, AI and climate change. What do these two things have in common? Maybe not much on the surface, but in a way, they are both manifestations of large-scale industrial technology which, in the opinion of many, have the potential to cause unimaginable harm if left to their own devices. So how does competition and consumer protection law fit into the big picture of saving humanity? Before we talk about that, I'd like to welcome my co-host, Anora Wang. Hi, Anora.
Hi, Alicia. Glad to be co-hosting this with you.
Anora, would you like to introduce our very special guest and kick off the conversation?
Yes. Today we'll be speaking with Fiona Schaeffer, who is the immediate past chair of the American Bar Association Antitrust Law Section. Fiona is also a partner in the international law firm Milbank LLP, based in its New York office, and she is a member of the firm's litigation and arbitration group. Fiona practices antitrust law and has more than 25 years of experience practicing on both sides of the Atlantic. She has a particular depth of experience in industries including healthcare, financial services, energy, media, and communications. Welcome back to our Curious Amalgam, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Anora. It's great to be here with you.
Pleasure is all ours. So let's get right to it. While leading the ABA Antitrust Law Section, you and the section have explored and dealt with many things, but it seems that the disruptive effects of AI and climate change were two of the main themes of your year as section chair. Why did you want to focus on those two momentous issues in 1 year?
Well, they're both existential issues that I think are affecting all of us, not only in antitrust, but in our daily lives. And the inspiration really for adopting them as themes this year, was my two sons, my teenage sons, one of whom had first alerted me to the existence of ChatGPT at about 2 a.m. when he called me. I was asleep in bed, and it was unusual for him to call me at any time, much less 2 a.m. But he called me very excited and very scared to tell me about this new innovation, which had created something that he'd been working on for months with a chessbot in 30 seconds. So that is how he really saw how powerful AI could be. And then on the sustainability front, my other son had written this really moving poem, which was essentially about how the oceans are dying, animals are dying, and humans are simply wringing their hands while the planet burns. So I thought I really wanted to do something that is not only important in our area of practice, but is important for the future generations, including my two boys.
Now, when Anora welcomed you, Fiona, she said, welcome back. And that's because we've had you on our Curious Amalgam at least once, including the episode where we introduced you as the section chair. This would be back in August of 23, as you took on the role of section chair. And at that time, you told us about some of the initiatives and issues that you were interested in. So looking at your year as the chair, what were the particular activities and perhaps task forces or other things that you implemented?
Sure. Well, I think we did a lot of different programming around the world. One of the things we did was a series of debates, which kicked off at Howard University, then went to Tokyo, and then to Oxford in the UK. And I guess we really ended up on that debate on stage with the leading antitrust enforcers at the spring meeting. And those debates were on the role of antitrust in sustainability initiatives. We were looking at what different countries have done to promote sustainability while still staying within the boundaries of antitrust law. And part of my goal really was to hopefully focus more on the issue in the US, where we've had less guidance than we're seeing in other key jurisdictions. So I really wanted to stimulate that debate. On the AI front, and also on the topic of debate, we had a chair showcase at the spring meeting that was debating the good and evil of AI and how we can best harness it while ensuring that we protect human beings from, some of the harms that AI is threatening us with. We also set up an AI task force, which has been really innovative and, in fact, has been, I think, a key mover in the what we call big ABA in developing AI policies and initiatives that are really encompassing the work of all of our members, not just the antitrust section.
So it sounds like some of these things are still ongoing, and that the work you did to get them started was really just the beginning.
I hope so.
And for listeners, I just want to alert you, we'll be putting links on this episode webpage to some of the recent work of the section with respect to AI and climate change, including joint section comments on the Canadian Competition Bureau's discussion paper on artificial intelligence and competition, the report on competition law and sustainability to the Japan Fair Trade Commission, and joint section comments on the European Commission's consultation on generative AI. So take a look at that if you're interested in more detail.
And let's get to the weeds for a little bit and focus on AI. One of the main goals of bringing you back, having this conversation, is to give our audience a chance to share the wisdom and takeaways that may have been generated through these initiatives and events. So what would you say are the main takeaways of the work that has been done so far in the realm of AI, and particularly for the substance, people who are interested in, are antitrust and consumer protection laws in the picture? And if so, how would they shape or be shaped by the anticipated disruptive force of AI?
Well, that's a big question, a great question, Anora. I think what we've seen with the development of AI is, first, everyone agrees it's moving so quickly, and that there is a concern that imposing regulation prematurely may stifle needed innovation. At the same time, we're also seeing some pretty big challenges that AI is bringing to humanity, including disrupting the professional livelihoods of artists, musicians, deep fakes that are, causing credibility of our system to be challenged. How do you know who's real, what's authentic? And so I think there's a general consensus that there's a need for regulation, but there's not real consensus at this point on how to regulate. There are different models out there that are experiments. Some jurisdictions want to be light touch. The UK is probably at that end of the spectrum. Europe, on the other hand, is more prescriptive in its approach. The US has had several bills directed at AI, but much like many bills in the US, it's languished and not been passed. So a lot of activity, not so much harmonization, and I think a lot of questions still to be debated about how we harness the power of AI for the benefit of humanity while mitigating the risks to us as consumers, as workers, as people with children. Those are the challenges.
I think that's very helpful. And also putting different regimes or potential approaches to AI in different jurisdictions on a spectrum is also a very, very wise and insightful way of looking at that. So people who are dealing with this professionally, and people like, the section who are the constituencies of the section and the professions as a whole, like practitioners, economists, regulators, and academics, what should they expect? What do we where do we go from here?
Well, I think that as antitrust enforcers, the agencies are really resourcing up with tech experts who are using AI to both find cases in the cartel world and also prosecute cases more efficiently. So the regulators are using these tools, and I think that means we need to be using them as well. At the same time, there's a lot of concern about how valid AI results are. Of course, everyone's heard of the case where AI helpfully made up supportive case law, and that was revealed in a New York court to be case law that didn't exist. I think every litigator's nightmare. And just questions about the integrity of AI, including bias that is not only evident in data, but is actually amplified by data that is manipulated using AI models. So we're kind of equally excited about the promise of AI as something that can make our lives more efficient, make us smarter, help us to see connections that the human eye and the human brain doesn't necessarily see. And the idea that AI is certainly largely unregulated right now, is moving at such a rapid pace, and ultimately may prove difficult to regulate on a global scale consistently. We're only as strong as our weakest link when it comes to the controls over AI. So it's a wild west out there.
Well, your comment about being only as strong as the weakest link ties pretty well to our segue to climate change. During the time that you've had to deploy lots of smart people in the competition law world to consider what role competition laws might play with respect to climate change, what have you learned? What is it that you think listeners should be aware of?
That's a great question, Alicia. If I were channeling Lena Khan and Jonathan Cantor right now, what I would be telling you is, at least in the US, there is no ESG exemption. Sustainability initiatives, if anti-competitive, are not going to be excused because they have good climate change goals as their purpose. On the other hand, in other parts of the world, I think there's both more guidance on what kinds of sustainability initiatives are compatible with competition law. And in some instances, there's actually movement in the law to take into account sustainability objectives in merger review or in collaborations that might otherwise be viewed as posing competition concerns. So I think I haven't found any place in the world where there is an exemption as such, but I do think different enforcers are more flexible in dealing with sustainability collaborations and transactions that promise sustainability benefits. So there is a spectrum of policy perspectives out there. I sometimes wonder whether those perspectives are influenced by the first-hand experience that some of these jurisdictions like Australia, Japan, the UK have experienced in terms of their changes in weather patterns, the Australian scene of being literally on fire across the country a few years ago. I think those experiences may be driving sustainability and antitrust guidance more quickly than perhaps we are doing in the US. Although these hurricanes we're having, I think, do reinforce that we are going to be faced with billion-dollar natural disaster events more and more frequently due to changes in these weather patterns. And just to maintain supply chain viability, we are going to see the need for competitors to collaborate more to ensure that products and services can still get to market when, for example, they have a plant closed down and that's the only source of baby formula or intravenous needles in the US. Businesses are going to have to collaborate, and we're going to have to figure out, absent explicit guidelines from the federal agencies, what is acceptable under antitrust law and what poses too much risk. I think we can do that.
Perhaps it will take another act of Congress to allow that sort of behavior. What do you think?
I would not be betting on any act of Congress dealing with sustainability issues, at least when it comes to how they are compatible or incompatible with antitrust. I would love to see an updated competitor collaboration guidelines that addressed these modern day issues. There is really no mention of sustainability or thought given to it in the 2000 competitor guidelines, which will celebrate their 25th anniversary next year. And I think, like the merger guidelines, which were only 10 years old, there is a real need for update. I was happy to see that the federal agencies, spent a lot of time and thought updating merger guidance. It would be great to see something similar in the collaboration arena.
Yeah, 25 years is a long time to go between versions of guidelines. I think you're right about that.
Sure. Well, it's a whole generation. They are older than a teenager. They're an adult, and the guidelines are now existing in a world that looks very different from when they were born.
If I may follow up, so what are the directions that you are expecting or hopeful that an updated version of the guidelines would go?
I would like to see more explicit recognition of the benefits of sustainability initiatives, that there is a recognition, just like in the UK, of public benefits that benefit the community at large from these initiatives. They may not benefit a particular subset of consumers that are, for example, consumers of products and services of a set of merging companies, but they do benefit the public at large. I would like to see some of those concepts recognised in the US. As Peter Tufano, who is a professor at Harvard, remarked at our Oxford debate, we don't have time to sit around and wring our hands and fiddle while Rome burned. We need collaboration on a scale much, much more than we've ever seen before. And that collaboration needs to be a government-led, it needs to be between governments, and we need the business community to get together and achieve these goals of reducing carbon emissions. We need to do that on a scale that we've never done before. So collaboration is incredibly important, and I would love to see some more guidance on how to do that without imposing significant antitrust risks. But absent that guidance, I think there is still a lot that the business community can do without fear of antitrust violations. And part of my message is, don't be afraid to pursue objectives that benefit our planet and are not anti-competitive.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I would agree with you on many levels as, just as a human being, right? As someone who is concerned about these issues, about humanity. But the temptation is that also to think, what can we do professionally, right? So people in their professional capacities as lawyers, as economists, as aspiring, I guess, even like students aspiring to be in the profession, what can we do to help ensure that competition and consumer protection law has a place or can help in these front?
Well, we can do what we're doing right now, which is encourage public debate about these topics, and also, I think, work together to come up with guidance, even if it's not guidance from the enforcers, but as an antitrust and consumer protection community, about how we can go about navigating climate change initiatives, but still be within the bounds of the law. Of course, we can also advocate for legislation. I think there's real need on the deepfake front. That seems like an obvious legislative solution. And we can, as a global community, continue to be a platform for developing innovation in the area of AI and sustainability.
I really applaud for what you did. And I think there's a theme other than they're both very fundamental and significant for the future of humanity, but also the theme that there seems to be a need of closer looks, right? Either through regulation, through legislature, or even through just update of existing guidelines, right? So obviously it's important work, and you have not done this alone. You have been aided by the section while exploring these important topics. Would you like to give credit to some of them? Obviously, we cannot name all of them because it's a large group, but can you give credit to some of the notable contributions that have been made to the section's work on these two topics in the past year under your leadership?
There are so many people I would love to thank, but top of that list is Anne Catherine Fay, my Shares Counsel, who was incredibly invaluable in both helping me develop these visions, but most importantly, implement them. Talk is cheap, action speaks volumes, and Anne Catherine is a woman of action. I really loved doing all of the innovative things we did together this past year. I think Andy Gavel and Ariel Izraki, Andy from Howard University and Ariel from the University of Oxford, Pembroke College, were both instrumental in putting on debates on ESG and antitrust and consumer protection topics that I don't think had ever been done before. That was a lot of fun, and it really brought together people from all sorts of disciplines, not just law, not just antitrust or consumer protection. Grant Berman also was a great contributor to the sustainability debates. We have a whole AI task force with a number of co-chairs who've been such a powerhouse this past year in developing content, making the topic engaging and real and practical, and sponsoring a lot of programming that has been incredibly interesting. I think you will have seen that at last year's spring meeting. Danny Asaf, who co-chaired with me the debate on AI at the spring meeting, was a lot of fun and could not have done that without him. And of course, there have been many young lawyers and economists who have helped me realize this vision. And I'm really excited about the future of the Antitrust Law Section. The talented people I worked with, who I know are just a subset of the enormous talent that we have among our young lawyers and economists, really makes me very optimistic and excited about our future.
Well, that's really terrific. And I think it's important for everybody to understand this is just the beginning. There'll be a lot more to come, both from the section and from Fiona. But that brings us now to the end of our conversation. But before we let you go, Fiona, we're going to ask you a couple of questions, get to know you a little bit better as a person. One thing we'd like to know, though, is do you have any advice you'd like to share with young lawyers or economists?
Sure. Well, get involved, volunteer. I got to know a number of young lawyers and economists that I wouldn't have come across otherwise because they, well, first of all, were in a program of young lawyers and economists and put their hands up to help me develop our chair showcase, the Enforcers Roundtable, and a number of other projects throughout the year. That was incredibly valuable to me, and I hope they learned something from the experience. I know that it was great exposure for them, and I learned from them, and I'm looking forward to continuing to collaborate with them in future. I know it's sometimes difficult to put your hand up and volunteer. You've got a lot of time commitments and billable work to do. But what I would say is that doing this kind of work in the antitrust law section, it's an investment in you, and it will pay off both in the short run and the long run.
Well, I think your own career is a perfect example of that, too. Now, before we end the show, we're going to play a little game we call the Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
The rules of the game are extremely simple. I will ask Anora to draw a random surprise question out of a virtual hat. Take it away, Anora.
So, do you have a furry friend of your choice, a cat or a dog? And then if you do, and you would have 30 seconds to speak to him or her, and him or her would be able to understand you, what would you say in those 30 seconds?
Well, I do, in fact, have two furry friends, both of which are cats, black cats. I really hope that doesn't make me a cat lady.
Nothing wrong with that.
My son and I found them at an animal shelter that we were at on a Sunday night, and we were kind of laughed out of the place when we asked, have you got any kittens? They said, the kittens fly out the door here, and you've got no hope of getting kittens on a Sunday night. But just as they were saying that, these two little black kittens were brought in who had been fostered because they were too young to be in the shelter and were just coming there for adoption. So we met them on their first entrance through the threshold, and they've been really wonderful parts of the family ever since. What would I say to them?
Yep.
Well, when they watch me work out in the morning and they are dozing, sleeping, licking themselves after eating, I always wonder, how did you get to have such a cushy life? I would love to know that from an evolutionary perspective. I did see a cartoon once that said cats back in the day when they were in the Egyptian world, they had a choice. Should we kill these people or should we let them domesticate us and look after us? And clearly they chose the latter. I think that was a smart choice.
Well, I guess we'll never know what the cat's answers would be, but it's an interesting question. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Anora, and thank you to listeners. We hope this was an interesting episode. Please do check out the links on the episode webpage and tune in for next week's Our Curious Amalgam.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.com. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.